Roughly 70% of Fortnite players are on controller, but 94% of professional Fortnite players play keyboard and mouse, meaning only 6% play controller. In this video, I interview one of the world's best controller players, Reet, to take a deep dive into why it's nearly impossible to go pro on the sticks, and I do some analysis on how bad controller truly is, what are the main issues and strengths with it, and of course, should controller players actually just switch to keyboard and mouse. But first, thank you to HoYoverse for sponsoring this video. The Honkai Star Rail x Fortnite collab is officially live, and the Stellar Hunters, Kafka, and Blade outfits are now available in the Fortnite item shop. This collab is running from the 26th of February all the way up to the 4th of March until 4 PM PT, and there's actually a way to get Blade free. If you purchase an eligible item in Honkai Star Rail on the Epic Games Store, you can get the Blade outfit in Fortnite as a gift with purchase. There's also a huge crossover community celebration happening right now called the Astral Rumble. It's a friendly 7v7 showdown with a mix of Fortnite creators and top Honkai creators, all playing on a custom Fortnite UGC map inspired by Honkai's world. Team Kafka led by Clicks and Team Blade led by Ninja, with tons of other creators you'll know and love. You can head to the Astral Rumble webpage and vote for your favorite team, and if your team wins, you'll have a chance to claim exclusive rewards. Honkai Star Rail has over 150 million downloads and even won Best Mobile Game at the Game Awards, so click the link in the description, download Honkai Star Rail, check out the new Planarcadia update, grab the top-up bonuses, and don't forget to vote in the Astral Rumble. So how bad is controller for competitive Fortnite? From 2019 until now, I looked at the top 100 Fortnite players based in EU on power ranking and analyzed which ones were controller players and took a bunch of stats. The highest placing controller player in the top 100 was in 2020, where there were 10 players in the top 100, and 3 of these were actually in the top 20. Unsurprisingly, this was also the year that had legacy aim assist and introduced at the time the most overpowered new linear and exponential settings. And unsurprisingly, once these settings were nerfed in 2020, the amount of successful controller players immediately dropped off. In 2021, there were only 4 controller players in the top 100, with the highest rated player being Kiko in 42nd. You can see this trend continues all the way up until 2024, where Teeny was ranked 5th overall in the year, and that's kind of unsurprising because he's been Europe's best controller player for the last 4 years, but he is a true outlier. What's more interesting here is that there are way more controller players playing Fortnite than keyboard and mouse players. By looking at tournament data on Assyrian, it's possible to see what systems players played the tournament on. I took the most casual of casual tournaments, the K-pop Demon Hunters Cup, as this has absolutely no requirements. It's a solo cup and it's a skin cup, so there's going to be a lot of casual players playing it. In Europe, 43.64% of players played on PC, 55.15% played console, and 1.23% played mobile. But this differs region to region. For example, in NA, only 29% of players played PC, whereas 64.04% played console, and 3.12% played mobile. By the way, what's crazy on this is in NA, there's over 9,000 players playing this tournament from a Switch 1 on probably less than 30 FPS, so these guys are the true grinders. Now, this doesn't specifically show you which input they're using, but the vast majority of those console players are going to be playing on controller, and there's still going to be quite a lot of controller players also playing on PC. Now, since this is a tournament and there's way more competitive players playing, I'm sure the casual numbers are even more skewed towards controller. So just based on this and stats I've heard in the past, I think it's reasonable to estimate that around 70% of Fortnite players play controller. This is insane when you remember the fact that only around 6 players on average are within the top 100 every year. So given there's more players playing controller and way less pro players playing controller, this just shows that controller is definitely worse than keyboard and mouse for the top level of competitive. Now, I haven't played controller in a few years, so I sat down with Reet, who's been one of the best controller players in the world for the last 6 years, to ask him what is it that professional Fortnite players struggle with when they're playing controller at the highest level.
Just like literally fighting, like building and editing. Everything is just so awkward. Like, it's just so impossible. A keyboard, like, you can just edit, build, whatever, scroll, reset, all this so easy. A controller, the amount of like work that you have to put in on your fingers to like do a triple edit, like you have to have one finger do 3 different things. Like, it's just so hard. Like, building and editing, it's literally just impossible on controller. Like, if you grab the average person and told them to go do a triple edit, like they would learn it like 100 times easier on keyboard than controller, like if they try to do a triple edit. It's just, you just can't get, I mean, you're not going to be as fast as Peter Ball or something, full stop. Oh yeah, like bro, but even the best, you're never, like I'll fight Peter in game and I'm just like Peter or Pollo or any of those guys, and it's just like, bro, it's like literally, it's like, what are we even doing here?
Now, this is just due to the actual design of the controller. The buttons and sticks are designed to be pressed by your thumbs, and then the index and middle fingers press the 2 buttons on top. This basically means that your pinky and ring fingers are pressing no buttons and are instead just used to grip the controller. So this really just means that out of your 10 fingers, you only have 4 that are useful for pressing binds. Now, on most controllers, there's only 4 buttons on top of the controller, and there's 4 build binds, a button for switch to build mode, edit, sprint, jump, crouch, switch weapons, and many more. So when you pile these all up, the controller just isn't set up to be efficient with the amount of fingers that you have. Now you can get paddles on the controller, or you can play claw, or you can do both, but you're still just going to be pressing multiple buttons with one finger and stretching your hand in awkward ways. Compare that to keyboard and mouse, where a lot of the buttons just naturally sit where your fingers are, and you have way more options with buttons that are on the mouse or buttons that are actually on the keyboard itself. On top of that, on controller, there's not really an ability to flick easily. The joystick is set up for controlled actions like tracking. It's extremely easy to track a target that's moving in one direction, since you just have to hold the stick in one spot, whereas this is way harder on mouse because you have to think about the friction of your hand and actually moving the mouse at a consistent speed. The sticks are also worse for flicking because it's actually just a max speed that you can move your crosshair at. Because it's basically impossible to play Fortnite with a higher sensitivity because of the small amount of movements your thumb are making, most pros already play on a relatively low sensitivity, so having a quick flick just isn't really that possible, because if you max out the stick to the full edge, you're just still not moving your crosshair that fast or accurately. This is a real issue after editing, because a lot of the times your crosshair is in a bad spot and you need to flick back to the other player. Ideally, you'd have your crosshair near the other player for good crosshair placement, but in reality, a lot of players end up with the crosshair nowhere near and they just flick back to the player to hit the shot. With the amount that you can move the mouse, this is relatively easy, but on controller, this is incredibly difficult.
Like if you have a keyboard and just like get in your box, they just tap sprint around in a circle behind you, it's it's literally just like, what are we even supposed to do? Like, it's just impossible. You just flick and hope you get lucky. Like, it's literally just like, it's just not possible.
This is one of the most fundamental parts of box fighting in Fortnite, especially at a high level. And if you compare any keyboard and mouse player to a controller player trying to do this, the speed of their mechanics are absolutely nowhere comparable. But from all of my research, one of the biggest problems controller has is that it's just patch dependent. I can't do a video about controller and not talk about aim assist strength. Looking back at the top 100 EU players, it really is no surprise that after the big aim assist nerf in 2020, that the next few years were a real struggle for most controller players. I actually think this is what makes Miro's FNCS run in late Chapter 2 and early Chapter 3 so impressive. In 2021 and 2022, there were 0 controller players ranked in the top 20 on EU. However, on NA, Miro won 5 FNCS Grand Finals during this time. Still to this day, there has never been a controller player to win an FNCS on EU, and the closest they've come is Wolfies in Chapter 2 Season 1 Squads, where he placed second, and then again Wolfies in Chapter 2 Season 2's Solo Invitational, where he also placed second. But both of these were pre-aim assist nerfs, and he definitely used that to his advantage. On EU, the only Tier 1 controller player since these nerfs has been TD, who along with Chap in Chapter 5 placed second in FNCS twice. Miro and TD are basically the 2 exceptions to the rule, but there's a very clear fall-off of controller players after 2020 when aim assist was nerfed. Keyboard and mouse is very consistent, but if Epic Games decide to just buff aim assist at one point, controller will be better. If they decide to nerf it, controller will just be worse. But this isn't only just about aim assist, the actual meta makes a huge difference to how good controller is as well.
Like for an example, like this meta specifically, like half zone, when you're sitting half zone and you're in on edge and people are jetpacking, or when you're on height with like an enforcer or like attack AR, like the aim assist on ARs is like, well, for me anyway, that's like the aim assist is really good. Like my AR aim is super good. Like I have better aim than any keyboard player.
Similar to tracking in a box, this is because when a player is moving at a consistent speed, it's much easier to track on controller since the joystick has to just stay in one position, like I mentioned earlier. So when players are using a wingsuit, because they travel at a relatively consistent speed, it's quite easy to track them when you're using a controller. However, this is much more difficult whilst using a mouse. Controller is also at an advantage when the game does not run well and it is instead laggy.
Yeah, so back in the day when lobbies used to be laggy and end games, it was like a lot easier on controller because it's like, no, you couldn't build anyway. So it was like, if you make it to end game on controller, it's like, yeah, it's cool. Like everyone's lagging around, no one's building too much, you can just worry about shooting.
Since LANs returned in 2022, the highest placing controller players have been Builds, who placed 24th in 2022, Miro, who won in 2023, Teeny, who placed 6th in 2024, and then Reet, who placed 13th in 2025. Now let's take a close look at 2023, which was controller's most successful year, as it was won by Miro, which I already mentioned, and then Reet also placed 9th that year. The server performance this season was atrocious. The Global Championship was held in Chapter 4 Season 4, and this is by far the worst server performance of any international LAN, and maybe even any FNCS. The meta also benefited controller players a ton. Admittedly though, the lag did make this incredibly difficult as they just started through the sky, but a lot of the way that they recovered their matches when things weren't going well was just to jump in other players' boxes, and this is just much easier on controller, in particular when you're in laggy lobbies. Now, I'm not trying to discredit Miro's win by any chance. Him and Cooper had a great mid-game strategy, and they played it very well. I have a full video covering this already, but I'm just highlighting that how for controller players, if there's a good meta and the game is a little bit laggier, or if aim assist is buffed or nerfed a little bit, controller all of a sudden becomes significantly better. Controller is basically meta dependent. With there being so many controller players playing Fortnite and so little successful pros, what is it that sets apart the best players like Teeny, Miro, and Reet from everyone else?
I think it's just like our brains. It's like the level of the way we understand the game. Like the reason why I was such a good fighter back then, it was never because like my mechanics, like yeah, my piece control is like good, whatever, all that stuff. But it's more just like fighting IQ. Like Teeny, you look at Teeny, why he's dominating. Like the kid's just a genius. Like every game he plays perfect, mid games perfect, early games. Like he has good aim. He has a goat on his team, but even if he wasn't playing with Shark, he'd still be dominating. Like, it's just like our brains. Like, same with Curve. He's a really smart fighter. He understands the game well, doesn't take much damage. Like, and then that's why Kira and Karama do so good too. It's literally just our brains. Like, we have like, I'm serious, like us five, if any of us had like god keyboard mechanics, like we'd literally be up there with like the best of the world, like Peters and all those guys. I'm not even trolling.
Reet makes a good point, because at the end of the day, it's literally impossible for controller players to get mechanics as good as the top keyboard and mouse players. You're just not ever going to be as fast as Peterbot. It's genuinely not possible. There's too many limitations on the controller. However, mechanics aren't everything in Fortnite. I did an entire video titled Fast Mechanics in Fortnite Are Overrated, and the entire point of that video was to show that the vast majority of things that pro players do have nothing to do with their speed, and instead it's much more important to be smart in your fights. The fact that top pros succeed while playing on other regions where their ping is 100 or more showcases that it's not all about just having fast mechanics. Now yes, if you want to be the greatest player of all time like a Peterbot, you're going to need to have fast mechanics, but the second player on most people's GOAT tier list is Queasy, and you know, Ferdoxy also won FNCS Major 3 in 2025, and he doesn't have bad mechanics despite the memes, but similar to Queasy's, they're not outstanding, they're not going to blow you away. What's important about these players is that their mechanics are good enough to compete at the top level, and this also applies for the best controller players out there. And that's never going to be the strong point in their gameplay, so they have to make up for it in other areas. If you look at the two most successful controller players in EU right now, they are undoubtedly the two most creative players in the region. Teeny has an entire strat named after him for planning and camping in other players' looting paths, and Cringe, who's currently ranked 18th overall in EU as of recording, is notorious for finding heal-off strategies, the pickle chip glider rotates, storm strategies to use fish. He basically always comes up with something very interesting that's always ahead of the meta. Both of these players are having a huge amount of success, and very little of that is to do with their mechanics. However, both of their mechanics are good enough to hang at the top level. So does this mean that most of these top controller players would just be better if they switched to keyboard and mouse instead?
I mean, look at G-Money. Like, that guy switched to keyboard. Like, he was like, no offense to him, he was just like not even good on controller. Like, I mean, he was like a mechanic, but he was like nowhere near a pro. And then the guy switched to keyboard, and he's out here flying around, like, just one of the best fighters in the region now. But if you're like willing to sacrifice being bad, like it's definitely like you'll definitely probably be better, especially if you understand the game well and you're just like stuck on controller. Like, yeah, I'd say it's probably worth it.
Now after this conversation, I looked into G-Money's results to see what the actual differences was when he swapped keyboard and mouse. Now on controller, he made 5 FNCS Grand Finals. In those, he placed 36th, 47th, 36th, 17th, and then 43rd. So not fantastic. 17th was his best placement, but you could see even by coming 43rd at the end, it didn't look like he was improving that much on controller. However, once he switched to keyboard and mouse in September of 2024, the 3 FNCSs he's played since, which were in 2025, he's placed 14th, 14th, and then 6th. Now I want to note that he didn't just hard switch to keyboard and mouse. If you look through his YouTube channel, he's been playing keyboard for quite some time, so he's obviously been practicing while still maining controller in tournaments. And he's a great example to show that if you're a high-level controller player, switching to keyboard and mouse might actually benefit you as long as you're willing to put in the time to practice. Specifically for PC, if you're on console, stick with controller. The aim assist is too good and the input lag is too bad to play keyboard and mouse. However, the main reason that most players don't switch is because they've probably never played another shooter game on keyboard and mouse, and they've just been playing controller for years and years, even before Fortnite. You will be bad for a while when you're trying to learn a new input, and there's no guarantee that you'll actually be better. Looking at the best controller players in the world, their mechanics are good enough to compete with all the keyboard and mouse players, but it's never a strong point in their gameplay. They're all smart, creative, and understand the game to a fundamental level better than a lot of the keyboard and mouse players are. And, you know, if that doesn't work, sometimes they just run in box with an SMG. Now, Teeny is clearly an outlier because he's one of the only successful controller players to really ever have broken through in Europe. And if you want to understand his strategies a little bit and learn what the Teeny strat is, you can click on this older video I have on screen right now.